So, guys, I want to talk about the movie Queen of the Ring, and I got some good news and bad news that, I really enjoy the film, and in my opinion, this is one of the greatest wrestling movies ever made. I actually think this is the greatest one. I actually enjoyed this a lot more than The Iron Claw, and unfortunately, I walked out of the movie towards the ending because I felt it got a little monotonous and a little boring. So, Queen of the Ring is about Mildred Burke, and Mildred Burke is one of the pioneers of women's wrestling. She's the first woman to draw $1 million. She made herself a millionaire through professional wrestling, and she married a man named Billy Wolf, who became her manager. And unfortunately, she dealt with domestic violence, infidelity that he did, and then also that when they got divorced, she was penniless. And I had to do some research on this. That I believe the story was that there was a match that she had with Fabulous Moolah, and Fabulous Moolah took the title from her, and that just further led to the demise of her career, really. And this movie was really, really strong because it really talked about women's wrestling, the things that women had to overcome, and then also just what the sign of the times were, that men had all the power, that there was a time where there was a divorce, everything went to the man. And then also too that when there's lawyers and everybody involved, they care about the women having infidelity or allegations of women infidelity, but not really the men, really. And then also too that it really touched on Moolah, because a lot of people really overlooked the fact that there was a lot of progression in women's wrestling, that women's wrestling could have been a really, really big deal in America. But what happened was that Moolah really held down women's wrestling because she controlled a lot. She was also somebody that prostituted a lot of women's wrestling, and definitely, when and she was also friends with Vince and stuff. So they all had the same, mentality of women's wrestling being, more about eye candy. And, it really wasn't until the women's revolution, the Divas Revolution in the mid 2000s, I believe, that where women's wrestling got taken seriously in America. So, there was a period of time, from probably until maybe the late mid 50s or until the 60s, I would say, from the 60s, all the way into the 2000s, that 40-year gap where women's wrestling, could have been something really big, but it really fell apart, really, because people care more about misogyny, the eye candy, didn't take it seriously, and also believed in the stereotypes that, women, cannot be serious athletes and stuff like that, but Mildred Burke was one of the people that broke all those stereotypes. So about Mildred Burke, what happens in the beginning of the film is that she goes to wrestling events at carnies and carnivals, and she is just really inspired and captivated about it, and she doesn't want to be working in a diner, so she really just does anything to earn opportunities to wrestle. There's a lot of people in town who work in wrestling or travel, and they frequent her diner. So she's like, what, I'm not going to make you that salad that you like. I'm really interested in wrestling. And it's also revealed, too, that she had a child, and her husband did that thing, too. When people have a baby, which is, he went and bought cigarettes. He went to the store and bought cigarettes and never came back, really. So that's definitely really unfortunate, but that was also very common. And one thing I like about the film is that it really talked about a lot of just the things that happened to women back in, just back in the 50s and post-World War II, that there were a lot of men who ditched their children and left the woman to raise the child. And, I talked to a psychiatrist. My psychiatrist did talk about that, and he did say that a lot of times people would believe that it was good for the child for the father to walk out, because a lot of people felt that, oh, well, it's going to make the child suffer through life, go through a lot of hardships, really, because the father walked out. That was a justification for men to walk out on their families during that time in history, which is, not right, really. You put hardship And what happens was that she lives with her mother, and she decides to sell the family business, which is the diner, and go on the road and learning how to wrestle. And she has to do a lot of like stretches, go on runs, lift weights, be very athletic. And she gets to start wrestling in carnies. And she would wrestle men, she would wrestle people, and it'd be like, okay, if anybody could pin her, they would win some money, really. But she always did a great job. She starts to wrestle women, and there was this one woman from Texas. I don't believe it was Moolah, but it was somebody that injured her leg, really. And they have a match later on in like the latter half of the film. So what happens is she meets a man named Billy Wolf who manages her, and it was one of those things that like he helped her career out a lot, and they were actually engaged. However, she cheated on him. Now he cheated on her, and he begged for a second chance, and then later on he did it, and then he was also abusive to her. So again, he was doing that thing like I'll apologize and I will regret the rest of my life, really. So he could have easily been like a psychopath or a sociopath, and it's just like what people say that he's obviously a carny. What do carnies do? Carnies will rip people off, really. So that's one thing. One thing that I liked about the film is that there was times where Mildred there were a lot of women getting like asking her for her autograph. There were a lot of like young girls watching her and just imitating her, like like her Hulk Hogan flex type of thing, really. So it really kind of showed that she was a really big inspiration for women, and she was also an inspiration for like young girls to believe, hey, what, we can wrestle, we can do more than just typical roles, which was raise the kids or work at a diner or sleep their way to the top of the company, really. So with that said, really, you go a little bit more in the film. They're successful and they do really well at wrestling. Mildred's manager, Billy, he wanted her to win like the light heavyweight title, and the people that they work with said, no, that's not going to happen. So they decided to do a shoot fight, which means that you wrestle in front of managers and backstage people, and if you win, then you go have your predetermined match. Or sometimes in the ring, that's when that happens, really. But usually people don't let that happen in the ring because, you take things, because things can be taken too far, really. Like, for example, you look at New Jack and the things that he did with Mass Transit or other people. That's why you don't take things too far, because people can take it too far, really. So they have the match, the shoot match. She wins like the light heavyweight championship, and she defends it for a very, very long time, really. And there's also a couple other things. They talked about, that for a long time, women's wrestling was illegal in many states. And, they had Jim Cornette be one of the representatives of the NWA, and it was illegal in many states for women to wrestle. There was a couple of reasons why that. First of all, there was the sexist stereotype of, that's just not ladylike. And then the next thing was that people considered wrestling very sexual because you're seeing women, just being thrown around and other things like that. And people just thought that was kind of very pornographic. Almost like you're watching like, girl on girl porn or something like that. That was just the general attitude. And I'm going to be, blunt about that. And then I also think the other thing too was that there was just that thing in America where people felt that it was indecent because it was also very violent, so the people felt it was really, really trashy for that to happen, really. And one thing that Billy Wolf did was that he also had black women, colored women, that's what they were called, colored women, Negroes, wrestle at that time, really, with Mildred, and then also Mae Young and other wrestlers as well, really. So so it's really cool because because that really was progressive as well. And that's kind of what a lot of people believed at that time, that you want to make a statement, you want to make a difference, you got to like hit it on all fronts. It kind of reminds me of All Elite Wrestling, how they had they hired Nyla Rose, and that was during a time when trans people were not represented well, and then you have Anthony Bowens be their first openly gay champion. So and then sort of talked about being the first black champion. That sometimes when people start a wrestling company and they're known for being a little different, they'll just try to say, oh hey, we're gonna touch on so many different territories and do a lot of really great things. That's just and that's kind of what he did, really. So it really opened doors. There was a scene where they buy out an entire hotel, really, because they're saying, okay, you know what, you either take our business or you don't take our business, because we want to make sure that everybody has their own room, really, even like the color, because this was during time of segregation. And also they did a lot of wrestling in the South, in the Carolinas, and then Tennessee and Louisville. And so during that time, segregation was really, really big, but money talked, really. That's how things happened. And then also Mildred Burke and Billy Wolf, and a few other of these wrestlers, they were actually in Washington D.C. talking to lobbyists and politicians about women's wrestling and making it legal in all the states, really. And they also did a scene too where you featured Vince McMahon Sr., somebody, playing Vince McMahon Sr., so that was really interesting as well. And I would also feel it felt a little repetitive, because it was dialogue match, dialogue match, dialogue match, dialogue match, dialogue match, a lot of dialogue. And that's when I kind of said, okay, this feels a little too monotonous. I think towards the end I was looking at my phone, I was saying this is getting a little boring, and that's why I walked out. And then the other thing is that I've talked about a little bit, but Billy Wolf, he wasn't really that good of a person. He was chauvinist, and I was a little confused. But I think what happened was that he had a son, or an adopted son, and this was not his genetic son. And so what happened was that his son wanted to marry Mildred, marry Millie, and he disapproved that, because obviously that would just be bad for business to say, there's a divorce and then there is an adopted son or or a stepson, marrying the mom and stuff like that. That just looks really bad. So he was abusive towards his son. There's a scene where Millie was calling him infident and just talking about his infidelity and his sexual insecurities, and then he just punches her in the face and beats her a lot of times. And she's just saying, you know what, no, I'm not going to put him in jail, because obviously we have to keep the show must go on. She has to think about her fans. And, that was also very true back then. I think that I'm happy that the film captured it, that, man on woman violence was very normal, and beating a woman and putting her in her place was very normal back then. And it's good that we have those depictions, because nowadays what happens with a lot of movies is that they don't show that, because it offends people. But you need to show reality, and that happens a lot in professional wrestling. There's a lot of just hurt and pain and abuse people tolerate to be successful in the wrestling business. You look at a few years ago in WWE, I think his name was Bill DeMott, who was making racist comments, and he was also bullying wrestlers like Kenny Omega and other ones. So if they ever did a film about Kenny Omega, you would have to feature all that stuff, because that's part of the reality. Or if they ever did a film about Matt Hardy and Jeff Hardy, they would have to talk about the drug usage and all the drugs and everything that was going in WWE and everything like that, really, because that's part of the history. If you did a film about Dustin Rhodes, you would have to talk about the plane ride from hell and all the drugs and the alcohol. You have to show the good side and the bad side of professional wrestling, because there has to be more education on how it is a very heartbreaking industry. And back then there was a lot of problems. Nowadays, there are problems in every industry, but there's a lot more education. There's better human resources. Things have gotten better. And also too, if there was domestic violence or other things, or chauvinistic, or men sexually harassing or sleeping around, nowadays, there's more of an eye on that, versus where it was in the past, really. Like somebody like Vince McMahon, and all the stuff he did with women, there could be no other promoter who does that nowadays because of, all the attention. Like if Tony Khan was to do that with all the women in AEW, there would be such a, that company would be done, really, if that hypothetically happened, if he used his power to sleep around with the women and stuff like that. Or, if Shane McMahon had a son, if Shane McMahon's son was in his 20s and he was taking over the industry, or if Shane or Shad Khan, not Shad Khan, but Nick Khan or whoever runs WWE, if they kind of pulled all that stuff, they would either be gone or the company would shut down, really. But back then, woman beating, sleeping around with your employees, that was just that was just not seen as a big deal, really. And then it really just ends tragically. Like again, like I did walk out, I didn't see the ending of the film, but they do get a divorce, and she's left penniless because she really wants to get out of Billy Wolf. And then what happens is that he is in the NWA, so he kind of forbids. He really just doesn't allow her to, have matches. When she has a group of women that work under her, like he just, he promises them more opportunities and more money. And then also, as I said, I did my research. So what happens with Mildred Burke is that she has a match with Moolah, and what happens is that I believe it was like two out of three falls, and Mildred actually gets a 2 out of 3 falls, but the title somehow goes to Moolah, or one pinfall, or one one of the wins got reversed or whatever, and then Moolah just got that title, really, and eventually Moolah became the NWA Women's Champion, and she held that title for over 30 years. But like I've said about Moolah, like there's stories about her that she screwed over Mildred Burke, she screwed over a lot of wrestlers, and really she kind of learned from Billy Wolf and other people, and McMahon's Senior and Junior and other ones, to be a cutthroat bitch and other things like that, really. So Mildred was not really that cutthroat of a person. She was kind of nice and kind, but she didn't kind of grow up in a very Machiavellian environment. She didn't really have that killer instinct, or kill or be killed type of thing, like that Game of Thrones kill or be killed type of thing, really. And she kind of suffered for that. That's just social Darwinianism in a nutshell. That some industries like filmmaking or wrestling, sometimes the nicest person doesn't make it to the top, really. He doesn't make it to the top, really, but there's always a bigger shark in the water. So that's that, really. But overall, it's a really great film. I really appreciate the cinematography. The art production was done very, very well. The costume design was very well. The woman who played Mildred Burke, she should be nominated for an Oscar. She should win a bunch of awards. Really great role. The guy who played Billy Wolf, as I said too, he did a really excellent job, and he did a really great depiction. I think everybody else was kind of like did a good job. Even like Cornette, he did a really great job, really. Like again, like I just was like, I didn't know who he was. I said he sounds like Cornette, and I was like, oh my god, he's Cornette. I almost popped out of my seat, like holy shit, it's Jim Cornette. But and it seemed like everybody who played a role in this film, they really, really, really took it seriously. They really, really showed Mildred Burke respect. It was not like in the Iron Claw, where you had somebody play Ric Flair and he did not even sound like Ric Flair. He did not just do the role a good job, really. So I just I really think that this film was very strong. I think the performances is a lot stronger. It's definitely a film that I feel like needs to get a lot more attention. I do think it's very, very unfortunate that, when they had AEW Revolution, they should have easily shown a clip of this film, and, one of the good scenes, like maybe like a 5-minute clip, tops really, and just say, hey, we need to check out this film. We need to support films like this. Mildred Burke has done a lot for women's wrestling. And also, Billy Wolf, he's done a lot for women's wrestling and, African American women's wrestling and African American wrestling, even though he's a controversial figure, he did a lot really, but it's more like Mildred Burke's story, so it really is a story about, our legacies that we leave, and a film about, just people who inspired women's wrestling and that they should be remembered. And there's people like Mildred Burke who, through the film, she's not somebody with a drug issue. She's not somebody who was cruel and backstabbing. And there are a lot of wrestlers like that. You make a film about any wrestler, a majority of them are going to be like these really nasty people, or these drug addicts, or these alcohol people, or just, or just these tragic figures, really. Well, I think Mildred's biggest tragedy was that, she fell in love with a guy. She fell in love with a guy that was just abusive, and that led to a bunch of problems, really. But she was never really somebody that, that just hurt others intentionally, So I really think that she's one of the few wrestlers that is generally like a really good role model, or has kind of lived a more virtuous life. But yeah, but it's also a tragic story, and it's also kind of a reminder of, why it's really good that that there's a lot more attention on wrestling, or when somebody is being like, a bad person in wrestling, whether it be the manager's being abusive, or cheating, or infidelity, or a woman like, Moolah. Like, honestly, your stories of prostituting people, like, that happen nowadays, and with social media, that'll be shut down. So it's good that there's more attention on stopping those things from happening, because a lot of those things happen behind closed doors. But it's also good that we have films like this to kind of say, hey, this is what wrestling is. It's a lot of hard work. It's a lot of sex, lies, trust, and betrayal. And, it's also a sad industry of, well, sometimes, you have to destroy your competition, even if that becomes your divorcee or somebody you had a relationship with. It's kill or be killed. And, and all that, really, So, but also, too, even if somebody's making a difference, or they're revolutionary, if they're your competitor, you know what, you got to think about yourself and what's best for you, really. So, it's definitely, a film that is, heartbreaking, but also very well made, very well acted. Everybody really gave a shit about this film. It's one of the best films I've ever seen. The best professional wrestling film ever made, even though it felt a little repetitive, So I would tell everybody I would strongly recommend Queen of the Ring. It's a very, very great film.